Welcome to this short presentation on the recently completed extension to Dunlop Church. Throughout its history, the buildings of Dunlop Kirk have changed and adapted to the needs and expectations of the congregation and the parish it serves, and in the last few years further enhancement has taken place with the completion of a new vestry extension linked to the main 1835 building. The facilities within the church are very simple, comprising a single main ground floor space with individual small entrance porch lobbies at each of the three external doors, plus the original vestry. There are three separate galleries in the sanctuary with individual access stairs to each. Following a major outbreak of dry rot and extensive defects in the external stonework, repair and restoration work was undertaken between 2008 and 2012 at a cost of £750,000. At that time, it was agreed that to comply with building standards regulations, the church would require to provide male, female and wheelchair accessible toilet accommodation. Given the architectural listing and the shortage of space in the sanctuary, it was decided to use the original vestry accommodation to provide these facilities. However, it was recognised by the church that there could be difficulties resulting from the loss of the vestry accommodation, and at the end of the first year in which the congregation returned to the church building for worship, the Kirk session reviewed the building and facilities and how they were performing. It had become clear that the pastoral work of the church activities was not being properly catered for, and that a future solution would need to be found in order to provide a vestry facility and to provide separate spaces for the 4 different age groups of children that meet on a Sunday morning. The initial approach was to explore opportunities to increase the facilities without the requirement to extend beyond the footprints of existing church buildings, and various option studies were undertaken, but the conclusion drawn from these was that the most viable approach was to consider an extension to the existing main church building. It was readily apparent that any extension of the church buildings into the surrounding churchyard would be extremely sensitive, both in terms of the setting of the historic buildings and in relation to the existing graves. Appraisal of the site identified that any new structures adjoining the existing building would have to be located so as to minimise any visual impact on the important individual A-listed historic structures at the southeast corner of the church building, namely the Hans Hamilton tomb and the former schoolhouse known as the Clandeboys Hall. It also had to avoid any intrusion on the distant view down Main Street and be hidden from the main entrance gate and approach. And of course it had to minimise disruption to existing graves and gravestones. The site area selected for the new build extension was to the north of the original vestry, in the area where there are no surviving gravestones. This location aimed to be sensitive to the churchyard archaeology, and with it being behind the forward line of the main north elevation of the church and tucked into the lee of the main church structure, it was also the least intrusive to the main view and approach to the building. As there was already a hard surface path accessing this area, the extent of ground to be disturbed and the potential impact on graves around the church was minimised. Designed by Grant Murray Architects, the extension is a single-storey structure intended to relate comfortably within the same scale and character as the original single-storey vestry. Its design reflects the traditional building forms and materials of the church and nearby village housing, and although directly linked to the existing buildings by a full-height glazed door and window, it is intended to be read as a discrete element that is detached from the historic structures. The eaves and gutter lines are set at a height similar to the original vestry, and the gables and roof pitch follow the same profile as the existing building. The extension has no impact on the skyline or the views across the landscape, and when viewed from within the existing churchyard, the visual impact is broken up by the pattern of tall gravestones that surround the immediate area of the site. The extension is constructed as a timber frame building with natural stone cladding and slate roof. The materials are of a high quality and durability, suited to contemporary construction techniques for a lightweight structure, but at the same time appropriate for use to complement the traditional materials of the existing church. The source of stone was carefully selected to provide an appropriate match to the existing church, and detailing around the windows was designed to complement existing church features. The completed vestry is a good example of a church finding a positive way of meeting the challenge of providing additional accommodation to support the purpose and life of the church, while at the same time respecting and enhancing the rich heritage of its existing historic buildings.